Welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast with me, Dan Haylett. This show will help you navigate the intricate financial and non-financial landscape of retirement planning, investment and income strategies, and the human experience beyond the traditional work-life paradigm. Join me as I delve into the challenges, triumphs, and unexpected journeys individuals face as they transition into this new phase of life. From experts across many different areas to personal stories, we uncover the secrets, insights, and practical tips to empower you on your retirement journey. Whether you're just starting to consider retirement or already enjoying this chapter, this podcast is your guide to making the most out of this remarkable phase of life. Now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Today's episode is a great conversation with Lee Robertson. Now, not only is Lee a great friend, but he is a former financial planner and founded a very successful city-based financial planning firm called Investment Quorum. Lee exited Investment Quorum about 5 years ago to co-found Octo Members, which is a tech-based platform for the financial service industry to share its thoughts and insights. Lee shares his insights on the challenges and changes to retirement over the years, drawing on his experience of working with many successful city-based professionals on their retirement transition. He emphasised the importance of planning for retirement, not just financially, but also in terms of filling one's day and pursuing their passions. Lee also discusses the shift from a traditional final salary-based pension environment to a defined contribution pension plans and how that has had a big impact on how retirement has changed over the last 30 years. Lee encourages people to focus on creating memory dividends and living a fulfilling retirement. He also shares his personal journey, and I was really intrigued to hear his journey of stepping away from a very successful financial business to pursue his passion in setting up Octo Members. Lee is really open in sharing his personal struggles and how he has made that transition from owning Investment Quorum to being a founder of a tech startup. He shares many resources and many tips that I know will be such a useful conversation for all of you listeners out there. I hope you enjoy it. Now on to the conversation with Lee Robertson. Lee Robertson, a warm welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Really looking forward to it. Thanks for inviting me.
Can't wait to have this conversation, Lee. We've known each other for many years. First, I think, laying gloves on one another in the boxing ring, which we can maybe get onto at some point. But I'm really looking forward to having this conversation because I'm going to touch on a couple of angles here. And I want you to share your journey, and I won't spoil it, but you were a very successful financial planner, owned a wonderful business in London. And I want to find out a little bit about how you observed people during your time as a financial planner. And your journey, I think, is a really special one, and one that a lot of people can learn from in the transitions that you've made over the last 5 or 10 years as you've followed some passions and some startup initiatives that you've done. So can't wait to have the conversation. You've got a lot to give on this topic.
I hope so.
So starting with you, Lee, tell me a bit about you and kind of a whistle-stop tour of your journey over the last 30 years, I suppose, since you've been in the industry.
Yeah, well, I came into the industry, the financial service industry, and it really was an industry back then. Out of the armed forces, came in through direct sales, did a year there, loved it and hated it in sort of equal measure. Then went into mortgage broking, and then went into bank assurance, giving advice to bank clients, and then began to realize that I thought was a better way of doing it, which was to go independent. Started a business with a guy that I worked with at the bank where I had worked. That lasted 5 years. I wanted to go fee-based, or at least fee-biased, which was a term I used back then, not fully fee-based, because the industry wasn't quite ready for it. The network we were part of didn't like that idea at all. Therefore, I had to strike it out on my own and did so, and built, I think, quite a nice financial planning business with other people alongside me, and then sold out of that about 5 years ago. I still do board advice and consulting and bits and pieces, but with my co-founder, Andy Brown, and Rob Page, who you know, Andy and I had this idea of a private social network for financial services professionals. So we founded Octo. That's been quite a tough 5 years. We'll probably touch on that later. But that's sort of me, armed forces, career one, direct sales into financial advice, into proper financial planning, career two, and then as I head towards my, the grey period, started my third career, which I guess is predominantly Octo, the private social members network. But I do other bits and pieces too.
I think it's a really interesting journey, because we talk about retirement as a thing, as a standalone thing, but it is just a life transition, right? It's a very big life transition, and later on in this conversation, I want to pick into your brain a little bit about those 3-4 transitions that you've been on, because I think the learning that you've had through those transitions is something that you can share with the listeners. And also, I think that many of the listeners don't really understand that they have been prepping themselves for a retirement for a number of years, because if we do look back, we've all been through a number of transitions in our life that we can learn from the emotional, the kind of emotional hang up, or the emotional challenges and behavioral challenges that those transitions and lend to. So I'm looking forward to getting into that a little bit later on. If I can take you back 10, 15 years, if I may, and obviously the beard might be a little bit less grayer and you might have a bit more hair, same as me on that. With your financial planner hat on, you've dealt with many successful professionals in the City of London, and many families around the retirement piece. What do you think have been the main challenges that you've observed in your number of years dealing with people that are transitioning from a successful career to what kind of life after full-time work looks like?
Yeah, I think there's lots of them, and we could probably spend hours and hours doing it. But I guess the main ones that I saw were people were concerned, would they have enough money? Were they on track? Was that going to happen? They were concerned about, or perhaps less concerned, but it certainly hit them once they got to retirement, about how they filled their day, how they, lots of people, perceptually, they dropped status. They went from running a successful company, they were a senior manager, whatever level they were. And as I say, we tended to do clients in and around the City of London. So they were of that ilk. And suddenly they were retired. And what did they do? They weren't somebody big and important in the office anymore. They were retired. And I think lots of people struggle with that mentally. There's a big, that for me was the biggest transition. It wasn't about the money. Most people at that level have got enough money to retire. They've worked that out one way or another, even if you have to continually convince them they do. But I think for lots of people, it was that mental transition about being home more often. And I know that's been slightly queered by COVID and lockdown. People got a bit more used to being at home, but lots of people weren't really prepared to be at home and to have all this extra hours in the day that they used to devote to work. And I guess the final bit, I would say, is that the perceptions have changed during our lifetime, definitely. Our parents and our grandparents, if they made 65, they retired at 60 or 65. People now, because we are hopefully fitter, stronger, healthier, we understand nutrition more, etc. People are living longer. And I think that 65 age that people used to look forward to is kind of largely gone, particularly among senior people who intellectually want to stay stimulated, want to keep working, whether that means portfolio work or finding consultancy work or devoting time to charity or whatever. They want to still be involved in the workplace somewhere. So I think those are the main challenges, I think. The money one, which was mainly a kind of internal perception that many people had. The transition point of what do I do during my day, that bit of, well, I don't want to retire at 65. What's this retirement thing? I just don't see that as a break point anymore.
I think there's three really interesting points there. I think we work with similar people, families and people that you work with. And I think the perception that people have is that there's an amount of money that is enough. But data and research suggests that enough is always double what you've got. So I think it doesn't really matter how many zeros people have in their pension fund or how much income they've earned or not earned or whatever it looks like. Unless we really tackle retirement head on and what are, the years post age 60, for instance, look like, then we're always going to go, well, we want more. And so I think that's a really interesting, the ability to help people tackle that and go, well, if you're left alone, the answer to how much is enough is double what you've got. If we're going to work with you and we're going to really truly take a look at your situation and what you want to achieve, then actually we can come up with something that is a little bit more concrete than just this hearsay double amount. So I think that's a really interesting point about the enough. I want to pick up on the status one very briefly with you, because I actually think this is one of the biggest challenges for people that have got an identity through work and a status through their work. Leaving that behind is hugely challenging and can lead to a lot of other stuff. So in your experience, what does that look like? Just delve a bit deeper into that for me. I'd love to hear your thoughts around particularly how you've seen people do that well, i.e. successful people, and they've had status, but they've transferred that status or kept that status or were very happy to let go of it and be someone and do something else.
Yeah, I mean, it's a vast subject, isn't it? And you and I are really interested in this whole subject matter of that psychology of retirement. I think where people do it well is they've planned ahead. They don't just go cold turkey, so to speak, on the day they leave their company, be as an owner or as a senior employee or an employee. They've worked out what they want to do. They've probably lined up some social stuff. They've probably lined up some travel, all that kind of stuff's lined up. So, some of the best I've seen got involved in either charity or social work in terms of social networking, city livery, that kind of stuff. They've got really, really involved in good work elsewhere, which kind of doesn't replace, but it certainly supplements. It feeds into that desire to be around people, to be contributing, to be part of something. And I think that plays in pretty well. I think where people really struggle is where they don't put that forward planning in. They go cold turkey. It's the golf club and nothing else. They've not really thought it further through because, if you're awake sort of 2/3 of the day, give or take, one way or another, and 1/3 of that used to be at work, 1/3 of it perhaps family, the other third sleep. To get that extra third back time-wise is a lot of time to fill. So you don't want to be sitting in front of daytime TV. You don't want to be just mooching around. You want to be doing something that's useful, that feeds your soul, that feeds your intellect. And I think people who are successful are generally, I found, very curious people. They like to understand things, they like to learn things, they like to interact with people. And even the introverts, tend to be high-performing introverts, and they understand that social interaction is necessary and all that kind of stuff. So I think the very best of the retirement transition that I saw as a financial planner were people who put planning in ahead of time, not just the financial planning and the cash flow modeling, but they put real thought into, right, what am I going to do with all this extra time? Am I going to write a book? Am I going to join a city delivery group? Am I going to join a networking group? Am I going to become a visiting lecturer? That's something I've done, become a visiting lecturer at a university. All that kind of stuff. So put the time in, start building your bona fides there, and find ways to fill your day. And for me, I think that's where people have done it extremely well.
Yeah, or start up a new business. And we'll get onto that in a second, right?
Or start another business. Yeah.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because there's the phrase that I've heard bandied about a lot that more, people spend more time planning a 2-week holiday than they do planning their 25, 30-year retirement. They're more obsessed about that. And I totally agree with you, Lee. I think that, and we've got a couple of exercises in our retirement planning playbook that we do with people that is around the subject of, what are you retiring from? And more importantly, what are you retiring to? I think so many people focus on I'm leaving the thing. What you do need to plan, as you said, you need to plan ahead and think about, well, actually, what is the thing I'm going to? Because that's more important. So I think it's so true in what you said. You mentioned a little bit about what you've seen change over the last so many years. In your opinion, and you can highlight a couple of main things that you think about, but in your opinion, how has retirement in brackets changed over the last 30 years, ever since you kind of entered the financial service industry? How has retirement changed in that period?
Well, I mean, the big obvious one in the UK, of course, and I know this is an international podcast, but the big obvious one in the UK was pretty much the demise of the final salary pension scheme. People worked for decades in the same organisation. They accrued benefit that was guaranteed for the rest of their life at whatever level, and that was a very secure retirement. But of course, they became very expensive to run. Lots of companies didn't want that liability, and they moved to money purchase. Which brings market risk, which those in final salary never had. So that's been the big change. People have gone, and also along with that came the reduction in tenure of employment. People didn't stay with the same employer once they were on money purchase because they weren't accruing all these extra years within their final salary scheme. They felt more mobile. Companies, of course, also the flip side of that is companies became less loyal to their employees, I think. They hard and fired in a way that didn't happen previously, I think. So people were sort of put into market forces of retirement and pension planning, etc., taking investment risk, getting less tenure, less security at work. So that's been the big change. People are much more mobile. Companies are far less loyal to their employees, in my opinion, than they used to be. And the public, with very little help and support, really, from government, had to kind of navigate that over the last 20 years.
It's a really important point because, I still get people come to us with some final salary defined benefits. And I can't reiterate, I use these words a lot, like they are gold standard benefits. These are benefits that people just don't have anymore. And if you can have 15, 20, 25,000 pounds worth of guaranteed secure income that will probably go up with inflation, or at least go up, that will give your wife or your husband some further benefits if you pass away, and you're taking no market risk, so you've got that security. That is, that's a phenomenal benefit to have. I think what's definitely changed, as you said, is that move to the defined contribution, the money purchase pensions that have now said, well, actually, you're now taking all the risk, Mr. Person, that you the risk is on you. But I think that also what's happened there, isn't it? It's led to more flexibility. So I think people probably with defined contribution pensions, this pot of money, are probably a little bit more aspirational in their spending, because now that they don't have to live to £25,000-30,000 a year, they can spend £1 million in a day if they wanted to. Don't do that, by the way. That's not advice. That is, but so I think, and actually, some of the things that are really interesting coming through now is the people with some lower final salary benefits, £8,000, £9,000, £10,000, and some defined contribution, and you can actually see how that works out for them in their head. There's a bit of security behind the scenes, and then they've got some flexibility going out. So it's definitely had a massive impact on how people view retirement, how people work. When people want to retire, people are retiring earlier or leaving work earlier now because benefits have accrued to a point that they can, whereas they couldn't get those benefits, could they, until they hit a certain age or got really severely penalised if they took them early. So yeah, it's a great point. Great point.
Yeah, and I think, I stress the point that the public have had to navigate that on their own.
Yeah.
Those who've engaged with a financial planner or financial advisor have had lots of help. That's true, but that's not really been driven by government or anyone helping them. They've had to learn to cope with market risk. They've had to learn to live with job insecurity. They don't understand, sequencing, all those bits that you and I as financial planners understand and help our clients with. And I'm talking from when I was a planner. Obviously, I'm not a planner now. But we help them navigate. But there's a huge amount of the public who don't get that help. They either don't see the value in it, they don't understand it, they don't want to pay for it, or they think it's too expensive, or whatever that is. So we've got this huge bulk of society who are not getting the help that they desperately, I think, need to get into retirement well.
Yeah, agreed. Because as I've said many times on this podcast, and one of the foundational reasons behind it is that money is one of the most emotional subjects and topics that we have as people. So if we're not getting the help, independent help, people that can, without any bias, look at our situation and help us deliver, or help people deliver on their objectives, then people running into this phase of life are doing so. I think are doing so blind, and it can really and in my experience, it means that what they end up doing is not living a fulfilled retirement, in brackets. It's a bit more mundane. They don't take any risks, and I don't mean investment risk. I mean like life risks. They don't give their money away, or they don't spend their money on the thing, and they don't follow some dreams that they've got. And if we're at a place in our life that time becomes our biggest commodity and also our scarcest resource, so kind of balance those two, then people aren't taking advantage of that, because again, if you're unsure, like you said at the start, you end up not doing anything, right? You end up just kind of stepping back and I'm not sure what to do, so I won't do it.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And it's always anecdotal, of course, but how often do we read about someone who's sadly passed away and they've got huge amounts in the bank?
Yeah.
That they hadn't spent, and yet they'd had a very sort of modest retirement, shall we say. So I think it goes back to your original question about planning well for retirement, understanding how much money you have, how long it's going to last for, what you can do, because I'm this huge believer, and I know you definitely are too, I'm this huge believer in that you're rich not just in money, you're rich in life experience. So if you want to do that trip to Iceland or the Antarctica or the Belize jungle, whatever it is that floats your boat in retirement that you've always wanted to do, the Galapagos Islands, whatever it is, do it. If you can afford it, work it out and do it. Because in Scotland, we got this phrase, you're a land time deed, and what a shame to miss out on life's experiences, particularly successful people who very often put a huge amount of effort and time into their businesses whilst they were working, and have probably dipped out a bit on some of that experience and some of that time with family because they've been so committed to their role. It's really important, I think, in that bit where you're still fit as you go into retirement, hopefully you're still fit, that you add to that experience of life with your loved ones, or just travel on your own, whatever it is that you want to do. I think it's incredibly important. Yeah. Wealth is not just money, it's life.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, Lee, because I think, the journey I see a lot of people do is kind of you overwork on the accumulation phase. So again, if you're very successful, you run a business, or you've climbed the very greasy corporate ladder, you've obviously done things and sacrificed stuff. So you over-sacrifice, and then stupidly you under-reward yourself. So it's kind of, actually, if you over-sacrifice, you then need to over-reward at the end. And a lot of people will just kind of come off that cliff and under-reward themselves. There's a great book, and I'll put it in the show notes, and I've done a blog on this, but Bill Perkins wrote a book called Die With Zero, which is an amazing book. It sounds as a philosophy a little bit far-fetched, but it's not. He's wrote an amazing book. I've given it to a few clients, and actually there's a piece in that book that talks about money should create memory dividends. And I think it's absolutely true. And Andy Murphy, who's one of my clients, who was a guest on season 1 of the podcast, I saw him and his wife Tina just before Christmas. And there's a couple of stories that I could say, I won't do it now, but they've read that book, and then now all of their language is about creating memory dividends. They've got a dividend pot that they're trying to fill up with memories that will give them that. And I think it's so important. People work so hard to get to a point where they have got a pot of things, assets, whether it's property or pensions or investments or whatever it looks like. You need to now reward yourself by using that stuff to create memory dividends. And if you don't, you will have regrets at some point in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, listen, you're preaching to converted there, definitely. I love that phrase, memory dividend. Build those memories, reward yourself. All that time that you thought, I'll spend another hour at the office, I'll do that at the weekend, that bit of work I didn't manage to get done in a week. Just reward yourself. If you've got the time to do it, you should be doing it, and find time to spend with the family too.
Hi everyone, Dan here. I just wanted to jump in real quick to say that if you are thinking about or unsure where to start with your retirement plans, then I've put together what I believe to be one of the best free resources for you. My Retirement Toolkit is packed with videos, guides, webinars, worksheets, blogs, and podcast episodes, and is completely free to download. Just go to the show notes where you will find the link. Now, let's get back to the show. So just on that and briefly, what is your view if we kind of forget about what's happened and think about what's going to happen? What's your view of what kind of a modern day retirement looks like? If people are entering into the thought process now, you're in your mid 50s, your early 60s, you're thinking about the next phase of life over the next 10, 15, 20 years. What does a modern retirement mean, do you think, to those people? What does it mean to you? What do you think that looks like going forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think there are some demographics at play here. It will depend on your circumstances, obviously. But I think for people who've had whatever success in their careers, whatever that might look like, it probably is less a destination now as a period of time. People will start to drift away from full-time work, but they'll still do bits and pieces. They might set up, as you said, another business. They might do portfolio work, bringing that experience they built over 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years to the marketplace by consulting or by lecturing or by just joining networking groups where people share ideas, that kind of thing. So I think it's going to be a transitional period as opposed to a hard stop, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I think particularly at the higher end of the success scale is such a thing. You know what I mean? People who've, as you described it, climbed a greasy pole of corporate life or run a successful business or whatever, they won't see it as a hard stop. They will see it as a facilitator of the next period of their life. And I think that's, for me, what I've tried to do. If in my own head, is think about, what do I want the next 10 years to look like? While I'm still energetic, while I'm still loving doing stuff, while I still like to come to London, while I still love to interact with people, while I still love to share what I've gained along the way with people. What does that look like? And I think that's what people will do in retirement. It'll be less of the hard stop and spend every morning at the golf. I know you're a bit of a golfer. Maybe that's why I'm using this analogy. It won't be every morning at the golf club, a bit of lunch, and every afternoon at the golf club. They will do other stuff as well. They'll mix and match some work, some social, some family, some travel. And I think that's what it will look like. But I don't think the hard stop of work it's there in the way it used to be. Absolutely not.
I think that comes back to your point about how retirement's changed. I think it's how the workforce has changed, isn't it? I mean, hard stop retirements were the thing that happened because people had very manual jobs and they couldn't go to work anymore. Physically, they couldn't do the job that they were doing. I think, as society and the workforce and how we contribute as people to society now has changed. It's less manual, more office-based, more, so the hard stop thing is not there to a degree because the physicality of work means that we can work. And I think that's a great opportunity. I've said before that there's a whole bunch of skills that people have got in their heads and knowledge in their heads now that they can continue to give back well into their 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s to things that are important to them, and it makes them feel good. And I think that I read a really interesting article the other day that kind of started to poo-poo this generational wealth transfer, that basically said, people that are entering retirement now are much more aspirational than they've ever been. And by the way, there won't be any money left to pass down because they're going to spend the whole lot. So I thought it was really interesting, and I'm very much of that kind of spend it while you're here, that die with zero mentality. Is if you're not going to spend it, give it to your loved ones while you're still alive. I think there's definitely more of that happening in a modern day retirement than there's ever been.
Oh, listen, absolutely. I think that's absolutely true. One of the things I could have said, I suppose, as how retirement's changing, the nation, whilst it doesn't feel like it, the nation has generally got wealthier.
Yeah.
If you go back 30 years or 50 years, which I can, the nation has generally got wealthier. Property values have increased. We're a home-owning society in the main, etc. So people have got this accumulated physical wealth. So it's an enabler. And if I look at my father, who was a manual worker, he was exhausted by 65 and didn't live long past it, because they were just physically exhausted, as you say. Whereas we've sat around in chairs for many years, which is probably not good for posture, but what it's not doing is battering your body in the way that physical labor does, climbing up and down ladders on building sites all the time does. So I think there's much more opportunity. People aren't exhausted physically by the age that the retirement-ish period happens. So to be able to still contribute, still be involved is really important. And I think that why shouldn't people, because most people are going to leave something to children anyway. I know this die with zero, and I'm with you. Spend it, it's yours, spend it. And I used to talk to clients about that all the time. But most parents want to leave something to either grandchildren or children, etc. And they'll do that in their planning phase anyway. But to be able to commit your own capital to yourself in whichever way you want to do it, it's really important. You earned it. You worked for it. Do it.
Yeah. I'm really interested to slightly change tact. Thank you for sharing those. I think it's such great insights. But I want you to think about now those observations and insights and learnings that you've had over your time as a planner dealing with people. Did those observations help you and impact you when you decided to step back from your very successful financial planning business, Investment Quorum, and did you apply some of those learnings to your own thoughts and feelings and journey?
Yeah, I think I must have done, even subconsciously. I had an idea that I wanted to do Octo Members Group. Andy and I had kind of come up with this idea together that we thought would be interesting to try. It's 5 years old now. So yes, I'd done some prior planning, and I think I finished it at the financial planning firm on the Thursday, and on the Monday I took the first desk for Octo. So I didn't practice what I preached there, and didn't have a break or anything. I just got straight into it. But I'm highly competitive. The armed forces brought that out in me. I'm highly competitive, and once I've got something in my head, I like to crack on with it. So and what I didn't want to do was just retire. For all the reasons I've talked about. I still feel I've got something to give. I love to interact. I love to share knowledge. I love to soak up knowledge from other people. And you and I have both done the really excellent Building the Behavioral Advisor course with Shaping Wealth. We're alumni of that. I'm not a financial planner anymore, but I really wanted to do that course. So, I did it. So I love to soak up knowledge all the time. I'm a voracious reader. I listen to podcasts all the time. Although, interestingly, I'm a bit more visual, so I rather like YouTube type podcasts. And TED Talks I love, and all that kind of stuff. And there's millions of sites I could direct people to. But so I think I probably have. Keep your curiosity. Don't see the selling of your business as a hard stop. I'd already put a lot of mental thought with Andy into what I want to do with Octo Members Group. So yeah, I did apply some principles.
I think just one observation I want to make really on knowing you through that journey and how I think this could help and impact other people's thoughts is that you were an amazing and still are an amazing networker, and you built up a huge social network of friends that were just more than work colleagues or industry peers and colleagues. And that's obviously very important to you, those friendships that you created. And so what I really admire about what you've done is that you've created an avenue and a way to make sure that that's maintained, right? If you just ripped that out of Lee Robertson's life tomorrow, that's a huge thing, the huge hole to avoid, to fill. And I think that lesson for me, for anyone else out there, is that, you need to make sure that you do stuff that maintains those social connections that you've actually built up over a number of years, and those friendships. And I know you go down into London 2 or 3 times a week, and you make sure you catch up. And we've had some nice lunches. You make sure that you catch up with people and you have those social connections, because it's so important. It's so, so important when you decide to step back from a thing and move to something else, that you have an ability. And it doesn't mean you set up another business in that thing, but you make sure that you keep those connections that are dear to you.
Listen, absolutely. Nobody ever believes this, but I'm a natural introvert. But what I found was, if I forced myself to meet people, I enjoyed it. So over time, it becomes easier and easier. And you're absolutely right. I love being part of a big network of people who help each other. And listen, I'm going to make no bones. 2023 for me was a horrible year, personally and professionally. And without the help of many friends, including you, it would have been a lot harder, So many of those people I met originally professionally, who went on to become friends, really stepped up last year and made sure I was okay.
Yeah. I think there's a reason why the studies out there, and I've mentioned it a few times, that say that, social connections and true friendships are the thing that makes us happiest. Actually, the things that gives us longevity. So if we want longevity in our lives, we need to be healthy. We need to eat well. Don't drink loads of alcohol or wine. All that's quite challenging. But actually, the number one reason that people live longer is because they maintain true social connections and friendships. Because when the chips are down, it's important that you've got those, as you said. And look, people entering retirement, I've seen before, it's a roller coaster journey, right? It's not a smiley, happy, wonderful time all of the time. And when you go through these phases, because stuff happens. So you need people to be able to speak to and talk to. It's such an important part of having the tribe of people around you.
For me, it's the most important thing. I mean, I think there are some things that are part of my DNA, which, I'm eternally curious. I love to learn. I love to be around people despite being an introvert, because I always learn from them, you can't, you and I catch up for lunch and we just learn from each other, despite the fact we're friends also, and we've known each other for decades and all that kind of stuff, but we learn from each other constantly. And I think that the social bit, and that's so much more important than the money bit. It's so much more important. I mean, I tell this story. I used to tell this story as a financial planner about planning for retirement. And if you'll indulge me, it was years ago, living in London, and we lived next door to a lovely couple, and she grew flowers and showed flowers, and he worked for the post office, and they had this lovely dog, and occasionally I'd walk the dog for them and all that kind of stuff. And then he retired from the post office. And we could hear them screaming through the wall at each other because he'd worked nights and he hadn't planned for his retirement when he retired. And it took about a year for them to find the equilibrium. And that was to go and meet up with his former colleagues.
I think it's interesting how that, I see it a lot. You kind of leave the thing, miss the thing, kind of go back to the thing, right? It doesn't mean you go back to work, but you just, what are the reasons why you're going? And again, one of the exercises that we do with people is the thoughts we try and invoke in people through the financial planning work that we do, or the retirement planning work that we do, is that, what are the non-financial things that you're going to miss from work? Because I'm telling you now, there's a lot more non-financial things you're going to miss from work than financial things, and you need to understand what they are. And actually, because work equals money for a lot of people, we underestimate and somewhat neglect the non-financial aspects that our job provides us. And I think it's such an important thing for people to do. I'm going to ask a couple of questions in one here, and divulge as much or as little as you want on these questions. But kind of what made you step away from Investment Quorum, which was seen by many as a hugely successful and still is going now a very successful financial planning business at the forefront of many things that we take for granted today. So, what was that? What made you do that? And what was that journey of stepping away like for you? Because you've gone from the business owner of a very successful business to a startup, effectively tech entrepreneur. What made you step away, and what's that journey been like for you over the last 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like growing businesses more than maintaining them, if that makes sense. I think I don't want to talk for the firm now because they're doing very well, and I'm very pleased with that. They've got a great bunch of clients, great bunch of people, and I wish them every success. But I think I've got slightly, bored's not quite the right thing. I got slightly unfulfilled. I also, to be fair, I brought virtually every new client in. And that was hard work. As you get older, that becomes harder and harder. I tended to find new clients by socialization and by going out socially. And much as I've said, I enjoy the social side. To do it night after night, day after day, and do your financial planning job, and do strategy for the business, and all the press that I used to do, and the TV I used to do, and all that kind of stuff. It's a big ask. It's a huge ask of someone who gets into their 50s. So I kind of, there were lots of reasons, a bit more downtime, a bit more me time, a bit less time feeling I was on this hamster wheel of having to generate clients, not just for myself, but for the business and the other advisors too. I'm not saying they never brought clients in, but I was the majority. If I looked at the structure and we mapped every client and where they'd come from, it was pretty obvious who'd done most of that work. It becomes a bit tiring, to be fair. And I had this itch, which was Octo as well, and it kind of, sooner or later, you've got to scratch the itch or just walk away from it. And Andy and I talked long and hard about it, having both come up with this idea together, that it just seemed like it was probably about the right time. Also, I think we had slightly different ideas about the business. I'd always wanted to grow it much bigger. I think there was less appetite among some of my colleagues for that. They wanted to, we talk about in financial services lifestyle businesses. I'm not sure they are a lifestyle business. They're a bit more than that. But I wanted to be much bigger and they didn't. So there was some tensions there as well. And I think sooner or later, you've got to follow your heart, follow your dream. And I think it felt like the right time to step away. And that's all I can really say. It just felt like the right time. And also, whilst I had this idea and this energy to devote to something else, why not?
Yeah. Do you know what? I think that the huge lesson there for me around purpose and passion, the sooner in our planning when we get to this phase of life, and actually, to be fair, it doesn't have to apply to in your 50s and 60s. It can be in your 30s and 40s or 20s. But the concept of ikigai, the Japanese concept, which I've talked a lot about before, I think once you find your passion and your purpose, then you need to make sure that you follow that, and because that's where fulfillment leads. And one of the big takeaways from what you've just said for me is, if there's people listening that have got some ambition and got some dreams and got some understanding or some thoughts about what they want to do, and they're kind of thinking, "Oh, this really floats my boat, but this thing over here doesn't quite do it for me." There's huge amounts of bravery in what you did, but that's what's needed, right? You need to be brave. You need to understand what makes you tick, what gets the heart fluttering, what gets you out of bed in the morning, and particularly in this phase of life, in your 50s, 60s, double down on that, because that's what gives you so much happiness. And that's kind of what you've done. You found a purpose and a passion around what Octo does. I know you're a huge tech geek, and that's allowed you to kind of do a lot of that work that you do. And the platform that you've built is amazing. So you can see the difference, I think, can't you, in kind of the work done when people really truly hone in on the passions that they have and the purpose that they want.
Yeah, listen, I think so. Passion's a great driver, I think. And to be able to follow, I mean, going all the way back to my time in the forces, I mean, I was a pretty poor student at school, to be fair, too much mucking around and not paying attention. not particularly ambitious. Joined the military, and somehow it brought out ambition in me, and it brought out real competitive spirit in me. So I ended up working in small groups rather than big organizations, small teams, that kind of stuff, which was just brilliant. And that kind of striving for excellence and being the best you possibly can. And I've always tried to carry that through my whole life. And then if I look at Octo, I mean, listen, it's not been a bed of roses. We launched not long before COVID. We were pretty much uncontested, I suppose, back then. Hardly anyone else was doing what we were doing. Now there's lots of different groups doing it. We made a couple of shocking hires, I would say, that have cost us dearly. And we're not out of the woods yet, but we're almost at 4,000 members. We've run, and you very kindly spoke at our last event. You've attended both of them, our annual event for financial planners. So for me, being a financial planner was a passion. And I think I took a huge amount of pride and felt it was a privilege to serve my clients well, to help them get to retirement, to help them plan for all those eventualities. And to be able to, with Octo, in some small way, help financial planners. And as you know, I do quite a lot of mentoring and helping people, board advice and that kind of stuff. To be able to share some of that experience over the years in a dynamic sector like financial planning is a privilege. So it is a passion. Yeah, absolutely. As I say, it's been a hard, it's going to say in Scotland, a bit of a say effect, but at almost 4,000 members, highly engaged, we seem to be doing okay. We just got to get some of our kind of back history behind us. But yeah, listen, it's lovely to be able to put passion into something new. And whilst it's 5 years old, it still feels new. To be able to bring that passion and to interact with people like you and all the other people that support us is just, it brings so much fulfillment.
I think that a huge lesson to be learned there, and I'll answer my own question I asked right at the start around, what have I observed around people that are successfully transitioning, and it's that mindset of knowledge transfer. So it's that I want to take what I've got and I want to transfer it to somewhere else. That I want to make sure that I can. I give back's maybe the wrong word, but it's the mentoring, the and the maybe the charitable work and actually getting into sectors that are really important to you and doing some stuff there. That's where I've seen people the happiest, where they're kind of narrowing down the really things that, and Carl Richards says it quite well, right? I think you want to basically do more of the things that you love doing and less of the things that you don't like. That's really the simplistic form of how we want to transition into retirement. Yeah,
and Carl's brilliant at that stuff. I love his drawings. I love your drawings too, by the way. But that's such a good phrase. Do more of what you want to do and gives you pleasure. Do less of what didn't. And I think even those of us who were committed to our previous role, pre-retirement, if that's the phrase, there was lots of it you didn't like. Whether it was the hours, whether it was the commute, whether it was the manager above you, or whether it was the team below you, whatever it was that irked you, to be able to follow more of what you want to do and gives you fulfillment in retirement is such a great thing to be able to do. And hopefully you've arrived with the mental capacity and the financial capacity to be able to do so.
Lee, I think that's a wonderful place for us to start to kind of wrap this up. I've got a question I want to ask you, and just as a point of reference for the listeners, really, is there anything that you've read, that you've listened to, that you've thought that would, that you would say that the listeners should kind of go and order off Amazon or download a podcast? Is there a couple of things that you think would really benefit people in this stage of their life?
Yeah, I do. So I'm a huge fan of, and our mutual friend Neil Page put me onto this, but Daniel Huberman on YouTube. As I said, I'm quite visual. So Daniel Huberman has just this fantastic series. I mean, I could sit and give resources all day, but one that really stood out for me, and I came to him quite late, but through Neil Page, was Daniel Huberman, who's got this great podcast on YouTube and elsewhere, where he talks about facets of health, in terms of sleep and mental well-being and all those other bits and pieces that add up to the human. And I think that's such a great place to start. I struggle with sleep. I always have done. And I'm not sure the military helped, because they had me up at all strange hours of the day. And the military like to do things at 4 o'clock in the morning that other people don't. So my sleep's never been great. And Daniel Huberman's really helped there. But it's not just that. There's all sorts of, there's social stuff he does, there's the health stuff he does, the mental stuff he does. And for me, that was a really useful resource during the period when I was doing this transition from owning and operating a financial planning business to starting up with Andy and Rob this brand new startup. So I find that really useful, and I would commend that series to anyone. I'd obviously commend this podcast. I think this is a brilliant resource for people heading into retirement, and I know people will be listening to it. But if this is the first episode you listen to, there'll be far better ones in the back catalogue, I would say. So go and listen to them too. But listen, and of course your artwork, I think is so simply brilliant, and I mean that in both ways. It just makes you think about retirement in a different way. So that's not to fluff you. I genuinely mean that. I think much of what you draw, as well as what you say, Dan, is a real resource for people thinking about retirement.
I appreciate that. I didn't load the question.
I know
there's no payment. You didn't even know I was going to ask that. So no, thank you. But I'll link. I'll link Daniel Huberman stuff. I think I've listened to a few things. I think it's brilliant. So I'll link that. So Lee, this has been such a great conversation. It's going to add so much value to people. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your knowledge and being so open in sharing your story. I really appreciate it. Listen, an absolute pleasure. And I wish all your viewers a happy, healthy and long retirement, doing more of the things you want to do. What a wonderful way to end. Thank you, Lee. And look, thank you everyone for listening to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Until next time, take care. Thanks for tuning in to the Humans versus Retirement podcast. I hope this show will arm you with insights, strategies, and a newfound excitement for navigating life beyond the 9-to-5 grind. Remember, retirement isn't just an endpoint, it's a vibrant chapter brimming with opportunities for growth, adventure, and purpose. Keep exploring, stay curious, and embrace the next phase of your life with enthusiasm. Until next time, may your retirement dreams continue to flourish and inspire.